Chapter 30, Part 1 of J.S. Bach, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. J.S. Bach, Volume 2 by Albert Schweitzer. Translated by Ernest Neumann. Chapter 30, Part 1. The Secular Cantatas. Bach-Gesellschaft 11, Part 2, 1861. Bach-Gesellschaft 20, Part 2, 1870. Bach-Gesellschaft 29, 1879. Bach-Gesellschaft 34, 1884. The master of the secular cantatas was consigned to even longer oblivion than the master of the church cantata. Forkel knew only the peasant cantata. The publication of the Bach-Gesellschaft edition brought to light several works of whose existence no one had had any notion. How many more must be irrevocably lost? Still, we possess enough secular cantatas, about 20, to be able to rejoice in the other side of Bach's genius. His first secular cantata originated in the Weimar period. It is entitled Was mir behagt, ist nur die muntre Jagd. It was performed on 23rd February 1716, on which day Duke Christian von Sachsen-Weissenfels celebrated his 53rd birthday by a great hunting party. Bach's master, Duke Ernst Wilhelm, was invited and surprised his friend with a fine table music. The cantata was musicized during the banquet in the gamekeeper's lodge. Duke Christian would have probably found it hard to believe that the cantata would do more to preserve his name for future ages than all his own sovereign acts. Bach evidently worked at it con amore. The text is by Salomo Frank, the secretary of the upper consistory at Weimar, for whose sacred cantata poems Bach had a high regard. In accordance with the taste of the time, the poet goes back to mythology, making sundry great and small gods pay their homage to the object of the day's celebration. The theme of the text is as follows. Endymion feels himself to be slighted by Diana, his beloved, and reproaches her. She makes the excuse that today she must follow the chase and give her favorite hero, Christian, a congratulatory kiss, to which arrangement Endymion has no objection. They are reconciled and together sing the praises of the great sovereign. To give the work the necessary musical variety, the Pan of the country and Pallis, the goddess of the flocks, are added, which makes a cantata of half a dozen recitatives, 8 arias, and 2 choruses. The music is uncommonly expressive and of captivating freshness. The work begins and ends with brilliant fanfares. In the aria Willst du dich nicht mehr ergötzen? Endymion sings his languishing love lament over an animated basso ostinato. Pan's song, Ein Fürst ist seines Landes Pan, is constructed on an imposing form of the rhythm of solemnity. The aria of Pallis, Schafe können sicher weiden, sheep can pasture in safety, is in the nature of a pastoral and is accompanied by 2 flutes. At the finish, Pan sings a dance song in jig form, Ihr Felder und Auen, sonst grünend euch schauen. This cantata was turned to account more than once afterwards. It was given on the birthday of the music-loving Prince Ernst August of Sachsen-Weimar, the only alteration necessary being the substitution of the name of Ernst August for that of Christian. In the score, the new name is simply written under the old one. Bach did not worry in the least over the fact that the names are accented differently and that the declamation consequently became nonsensical. He calmly let his people sing. Note, again, in the first recitative of Diana and Endymion, in Pan's recitative, and in the duet between Diana and Endymion. End of note.
Der treue erste Gott
When the cantata was given at a later date by the Telemann Society on the name day of the Electoral Prince Friedrich August, Bach, as we can see from a printed copy of the words that's attached to the autograph score, made only such changes in the text as were absolutely necessary. This time the work was entitled Verlockender Götterstreit. It was again performed before Prince Christian von Weissenfels, at a feast he was celebrating with his wife Louise Christine, née Countess Stolberg. On this occasion, the final chorus was sung to the following text, quote, Die Anmut umfange, das Glück bediene den Herzog und seine Louise Christine. Sie weden in Freuden auf Blumen und Klee. Es prange die Zierde der fürstlichen Ehe. Die andere Dione, Fürst Christians Krone. End quote. Our information as to all these different uses to which the cantata was put is derived from remarks in the score. Some of the numbers were incorporated in church cantatas. The final chorus, Ihr lieblichste Blicke, was transformed into the opening chorus of the Michaelmas cantata, Man singt mit Freuden vom Sieg, number 149. The hunting music and 2 arias are used in the cantata for Whit Monday, 1731. Also hat Gott die Welt geliebt, number 68. The bass aria of this, quote, Du bist geboren mir zum Guten, end quote, is derived from Pan's aria, Ein Fürst ist seines Landes Pan, and the well-known soprano aria, Mein gläubiges Herze, is an enlarged arrangement of Pelly's song, Weil die wollen reichen Härten. The latter is expanded from 36 to 78 bars. The vocal phrase is new, but the bass figure is derived from the secular cantata. The arrangement is not wholly satisfactory. The simple aria of the hunting cantata is in its own way more beautiful and better balanced than that of the Whit Monday cantata, in which we cannot help seeing ultimately that a new patch has been placed on an old garment. Note, Bach has written upon the same theme a small trio for violin, oboe, and clavier. See Bach Gesellschaft 29, pages 250 and 251. End of note. In Köthen, Bach had no choir at his disposal as he had in Weimar. For the birthday music Durchlauchter Leopold, which he probably wrote for his master in his first year of service, he had to be content with a duet between soprano and bass. Note, Bach Gesellschaft 34. It is true that he has marked the 2-part finale coro, but it was sung by his 2 soloists. The declamation is so curious, for example on the words Nimm auch, glücklich, and sei dem Volke, as to lead us to believe that the music was originally written to another text. End of note. In the 2-part arias, however, he tries to give the illusion that a choir is at work. He detaches the second violins and the violas from the rest of the orchestra and makes them play second and third parts between the soprano and the bass. There seems to have been no poet available there for the text. The mechanically rhymed prose reminds us somewhat of the kind that Bach himself used to write when he put his hand to poetry. It is therefore not unlikely that the text of the serenata is his own. The charming music breathes of gaiety and happiness. In order that it might not be wasted, he used it for the church cantata for Whit Monday, Erhöhtes Fleisch und Blut, number 173. The style of the textual transformation may be gathered from the first recitative. Quote, Secular cantata, Durchlauchter Leopold, es singet an Halswelt, von neuem mit Vergnügen dein Köthen sich dir stellt, sich vor dir zu biegen, Durchlauchter Leopold. Whit Monday cantata, Erhöhtes Fleisch und Blut, das Gott selbst an sich nimmt, dem schon hier auf Erden ein himmlisch Heil bestimmt, des höchsten Kind zu werden, erhöhtes Fleisch und Blut. End quote. In 1725, the Duke of Köthen took for second wife the Princess Charlotte Friederike Wilhelmine of Nassau. At that time, Bach was settled in Leipzig, but he had retained his title of Köthen Kapellmeister, and his connection with the court, and of course the duty of writing music for great occasions. On the 30th of November, 1726, the birthday of the princess, he brought his best singers from Leipzig and performed the congratulatory cantata Steigt freudig in die Luft zu den erhabenen Höhen. A little later on, he used the same music for the birthday celebration of one of the Leipzig teachers, probably the rector Gesner. In this new form, the cantata is entitled Schwingt freudig euch empor. The music gives very characteristic expression to this idea of joyous soaring into the air. The festive nature of the cantata impelled Bach to adapt it for the first Sunday in Advent, but he retained the opening words as these were necessary for the music. This was the origin of the sacred cantata, Schwingt freudig euch empor, number 36. About the year 1733, the Köthen secular cantata was again recast. It was adapted to the text Die Freude reget sich, and sung by the students on the birthday of the professor of law, Johann Florenz Revinus, who was very friendly with Bach. Another Köthen cantata, Mit Gnaden bekröne der Himmel die Zeiten, perhaps written in 1721, seems to have been performed at a New Year's festival or at some domestic celebration of the royal house. It consists of solos and duets. At the end there's a chorus, but only of the simplest kind. This work also was converted into a church cantata with a new text, Ein Herz, das seinen Jesum lebend weiß, number 134. It was intended for the third day of Easter. A specially delightful piece of work is the secular wedding cantata for solo soprano, Weichet nur, betrübte Schatten, which Bach wrote as table music for the wedding of some couple whose names we do not know. It has survived only by accident. It would have been lost to us had it not been copied out by Rink, a pupil of Peter Kellner. The poem is much superior to the ordinary occasional text that came Bach's way. The theme is the passing of winter and the coming of spring. Phoebus and his horses gallop through the new world. Cupid runs through the fields whenever he sees a pair of lovers kissing. May the love spring of the newly wedded pair overcome and outlast the transitoriness of outward things. To this expressive poem, Bach has written some particularly beautiful music. The vaporous semiquavers ascending in the strings in the opening aria depict the mists vanishing before the breeze of spring. While the oboe sings a dreamy, yearning melody of the type of which Bach alone seems to have the secret. The aria that deals with the fleet steeds with which Phoebus flies through the newly awakened world begins in this way. As the sketch for this theme is found in the final allegro of the sixth sonata for violin and clavier, which was written in Köthen, it is probable that the wedding cantata belongs to the same period. When Bach settled in Leipzig, he might have expected numerous commissions for occasional compositions. Such works were often called for in a town of that kind. Each great family festival, each birthday of any notable personality had to be accompanied by music specially written for the occasion. In addition, there were many events of the university life, ovations of students in honor of favorite professors, the official festivals of the university, and the academic arrangements on patriotic occasions. Bach certainly counted on a substantial addition to his income from these sources. The ordinary remuneration for a piece of occasional music was about $50. This cannot be called brilliant for the circumstances of the time, but the presence or absence of 2 or 3 such commissions would count for something in the cantor's domestic exchequer. It looks as if Bach were somewhat disappointed in this regard. He received practically no orders at all for official festivals at the university, owing to his having offended the academic authorities by his energetic action with regard to the services at the university church. He was out of touch with the students in the first few years on account of his not conducting any of their collegia musica. The public did not look upon him as a composer who could write graceful and sentimental melodies. Perhaps, too, the Köthen and Weissenfels Hofkapellmeister did not strike the Leipzig patricians as being sufficiently accommodating for a musician to whom they would give commissions for their festivals. We may therefore assume that Bach was entrusted with only a small portion of the occasional music performed during his residence in Leipzig. Görner and other 3rd- and 4th-rate great men, and later on his own pupil Doles, were much more in vogue than the master himself. Had he not undertaken in 1729 the conductorship of the Telemann Collegium Musicum, he would have hardly made an appearance at all as a festival composer. His poet for the secular cantatas was Picander, who served him better in worldly than in spiritual things. His heart was really in the former. For the church cantatas he could only string together phrases from the Bible and the hymn books without adding anything of his real self to them. In the secular cantatas he showed real inventive power, and could always give a certain amount of interest to the mythological trappings of the situation. The richness of his diction in pictorial images was of great service to him in these works, and his sincere feeling for nature makes him, at certain happy moments, a real poet. If Bach's secular cantatas are not merely occasional compositions, but primarily artworks of genuine nature poetry, and only secondarily and by the accident of their origin, occasional works, we must thank Picander for it. His dexterity is evident in his first text, Der zufriedengestellte Aeolus, written for Bach in 1725 on the occasion of a student's celebration in honor of the name day, 3rd of August, of the doctor of philosophy August Friedrich Müller, 1684 to 1761. In the cantata, Aeolus proposes, on this particular day, to restore to the imprisoned winds their liberty, in view of the approaching end of the summer. They rejoice madly over the destruction they will work everywhere. Aeolus himself tells them what is permitted of them and laughs in anticipation of what they will do. The gentle Zephyrus sings his song of farewell. Pomona enters and begs for a delay for the sake of her fruit-laden trees, but in vain. Pallas is more fortunate. She conjures the ruler of the winds not to disturb the feast that the Muses are holding on Helicon, the feast in honor of Herr August Müller. This entreaty Aeolus cannot resist. He recalls to their caves the already half-liberated winds. Pallas, Pomona, and Zephyrus sing a happy trio, which is followed by a duet by the 2 goddesses. The finale is a brilliant chorus, Vivat August. Note: Bach's poet, of course, had in his mind's eye the well-known scene in Virgil's Aeneid. End quote. The music is particularly vivacious. The first chorus and the recitative of Aeolus depicts the unbridled impetuosity of the scurrying winds. The aria, quote, Wie will ich lustig lachen, how merrily will I laugh, end quote, is full of lusty laughter. A remarkable contrast to this strong music is afforded by the autumnal melancholy of the aria of Zephyrus, Frische Schatten, meine Freude. In the aria of Pomona, we see the leaves falling wearily from branch after branch. What caressing grace, again, in the aria of Pallas. What restrained power in the air of Aeolus, with its accompaniment for wind instruments alone. Zurücke, zurücke, geflügelte Winde. What glorious sunshine in the G major theme of the Duet of the Goddesses. And all this for Herr August Müller, who could have had no idea that Bach's music was a feast of the muses that would carry his name down to the remotest generations. At a later date, Bach himself sinned against this splendid work. When Friedrich August II was crowned King of Poland at Krakow on the 17th of January 1734, Bach performed with the Telemann Society in the same month a festival cantata entitled Blasst Lärmen, ihr Feinde, that is merely a perversion of the text composed in honor of August Müller. The text seems to have been rewritten by himself, for no author's name appears on the textbook printed by Breitkopf, an omission that no poetaster of that day would have consented to. The new version, in which valor, justice, and grace appear, does not harmonize with the ideas and moods of the music, so that the combination is quite nonsensical. Spitta concludes from this that Bach certainly did not regard characterization as the central point of his music. This is an error. It merely proves in what a hurry Bach was to make sure that this society should be the first to celebrate the coronation. The festival ode, performed by the university in honor of the coronation on the 19th February, was written by Görner. The cantata Vereinigte Zwietracht der wechselnden Zeiten was written in 1726 for the academic ceremony of the appointment of Dr. Gottlieb Korte, 1698 to 1731, as professor of Roman law. The march with which the work opens was played by the wind instruments during the entry into the hall. For this reason it is not included among the orchestral parts of the cantata proper. We possess it in the score alone. For this composition, Bach made use of the second allegro and the final trio of the first Brandenburg concerto. The allegro became the opening chorus. The trio, arranged for full orchestra, became an instrumental intermezzo, ritornello. The alto aria, Etzet dieses Angedenken, with its individual accompaniment, also seems to be borrowed from somewhere. The music takes no further account of the insipid allegory, in which all the possible virtues appear, and admonish the youth of the university to follow the example of the new professor. What does it matter to Bach that it is tedious industry that preaches to the sons of the muses in an aria, quote, Zieht euren Fuß nicht zurücke, ihr, die ihr meinen Weg erwählt. Draw not back, ye who have chosen my way. End quote. All he sees is the musical image of the elastic step, so he sets the dull moral to a piquant piece of ballet music, which can be turned into a dance by simply substituting an instrument for the tenor voice. To ensure the elegant performance of the movement, Bach took the trouble to indicate the phrasing and expression in the instrumental parts. The orchestra for the cantata consists of trumpets 1, 2, and 3, oboe d'amore 1 and 2, taille, violins 1 and 2, violas, and continuo. Judging from the parts, each of the instruments, with the exception of the third trumpet and the drum, was multiplied, even the wind. For contrabass, cello, and bassoon alone, 4 unfigured continuo parts were written out. Some time after 1733, we cannot be sure of the exact date, this music was again adapted to the text Auf schmetternde Töne der muntern Trompeten for the name day of August 3rd. Several occasional compositions of that period must be regarded as lost. We merely know their titles and now and then their texts. Only by its title do we know of the cantata Siehe, der Hüter Israels, which is mentioned in Breitkopf's list for Michaelmas 1761 as a graduation cantata. On 5th June 1732, the reconstructed St. Thomas School was reconsecrated with great solemnity. For this occasion Bach wrote the cantata Froher Tag verlangte Stunden, the text of which still exists in the library of the institution. The cantata Entfernet euch, ihr heitern Sterne was, as we learned from Sickel's Das frohlockende Leipzig, performed on the 12th of May, 1727, the birthday of King August II, about 8 in the evening in the marketplace by the students of the university. The monarch himself was in Leipzig and listened to the work from a window in Appel's house. The music for the festival service in the university church was written by Görner. For the banquet at the wedding of the Leipzig merchant Heinrich Wolf and the daughter of Hempel, commissary of excise in Zittau, on 5th February 1728, Bach wrote the cantata Vergnügte Pleißenstadt. The text is by Picander, who, in order to afford Bach an opportunity for musical painting, gives speaking parts to the rivers. At a later date, Bach recast the text, substituted Apollo and Mercury for the Pleiße and the Neiße, and made them sing the praise of Leipzig and its council. When and for what occasion this revised version was performed, we do not know. If it was during the period when Bach was at war with the council, the composing of this libretto must have been even harder for him than the hammering out of the rhymes. The text is just what we might expect. Der Streit zwischen Phoebus und Pan and the coffee cantata belong to the category of burlesque satire. Both were written about 1732. The matter for Phoebus und Pan was derived by Picander from Ovid, but to ensure musical vivacity he made liberal additions of his own. In the sextet, Momus, Mercury, Tmolus, Midas, Phoebus, and Pan order the winds to withdraw to their caves, so as not to disturb the proposed contest of song. Bach, of course, did not let such an opportunity for pictorial music pass by him. We seem actually to see the clouds of whirling dust. Vivace et allegro. The tribunal is arranged. Phoebus chooses Tmolus for his advocate. Pan selects Midas. Thereupon, Phoebus sings a melody in which we find embodied a number of themes which Bach uses to express unspeakable longing. Pan sings a peasant dance tune, Zum Tanze, zum Sprunge, wie wackelt das Herz, in which words and melody are both plebeian as if sung at a kermesse. The middle section is a largo in which he parodies the elegiac theme of Phoebus in an angular 4/4 rhythm. The words run thus, quote, Wenn der Ton zu mühsam klingt und der Mund gebunden singt, so erweckt es keinen Scherz. End quote. Tmolus awards the victory to Phoebus and sings a song about music that is born of charm. Midas, in an aria written in the style of a village cantor, gives the prize to Pan, justifying his verdict with the remark that Pan's music fell thus on his ears. As a reward for his mad ambition, he is given ass's ears. Mercury, however, announces that arrogant presumption always wins the cap and bells of folly in the end, and we hear the bell jingling in the accompaniment to the aria. Finally, all unite in the praise of charming music that delights not only men but the gods, and for the sake of which we can calmly put up with censure and jeers. As early as 1856, Dane, the well-known Bach student, conjectured that the satire is not a general one, but that Bach had some particular circumstance in view. He thought that the cantata was directed against the rector Biedermann of Freiburg, Saxony. To the general discussion that took place about the middle of the 18th century as to whether in the reorganization of classical education music was to keep its old place in the school course, this pedagogue had contributed in 1749 a pamphlet entitled De Vita Musica, in which he maintained that not only was music prejudicial to education, but that it was usually the worst boys in the school who took up art. His object was to depreciate and annoy his cantor, Dolles, who a year previously had won great success with a singspiel on the centenary of the Peace of Westphalia. Bach had to endure from his own rector just what his pupil Dolles had to put up with from Biedermann. He consequently took a lively interest in the controversy that arose around the pamphlet, and in which every musician of note, especially Matheson, fell furiously on the luckless author. Bach regretted that his health did not permit him to take up the pen himself, but he had an answer composed by a certain Schröter of Notthausen, a member of the musical society. This pleased him so much that on the 10th December 1749 he wrote to Einecke in Frankenhausen that, quote, he did not doubt that such refutationes would clean the author's dirty ear and make it more fit to listen to music, end quote. It would be quite possible that Bach had attacked the malicious rector in a satirical cantata. On closer examination, however, it becomes clear that Der Streit zwischen Phoebus and Pan does not relate to this matter. It is not directed against one who despises art, but against a superficial critic. A decisive point is that the text existed as early as 1732, when it was published in the third part of Picander's poems. It can therefore only refer to Bach's critic, Scheibe. Note: Otto Lindner controverted Dane's hypothesis in an article on Biedermann und Bach in the Vossische Zeitung for 1st and 8th July 1860. The correct theory is stated by Rust in the preface to Bachgesellschaft 11 and by Spitta. End of note. It is true that the latter's views upon Bach's music only appeared in the Kritischer Musicus of 1737. His animosity, however, dates from about 1729, when Bach had not supported his candidature for the post of organist at St. Thomas's, as Scheibe would have liked. He could not fail to speak offensively of Bach's music afterwards, so that the composer had good cause to ridicule him musically in the Telemann Society. This explains the character and the date of origin of the work. The points of the text are clear. Midas is Scheibe. The latter had charged Bach's music with being turgid and confused, and maintained that it must have been artificial and far-fetched, since it did not aim at an immediate appeal to the senses. This is why Midas sings, quote, Ach, Pan, wie hast du mich gestärkt! Dein Lied hat mir so wohl geklungen, dass ich es mir auf einmal gleich gemerkt. Der Phoebus macht es gar zu bunt. Allein dein allerliebster Mund sang leicht und ungezwungen. O Pan, thy song was life to me. My heart was stirred with strange emotion, and as I listened, lo, it seemed to me I heard the plaintive music of the woodland, the sighing of the restless ocean. Not Phoebus should receive the prize, but thou, whose song in simple wise thy hearers all hath charmed. End quote. The cantata is thus a product of the same spirit as Wagner's Die Meistersinger. Bach wrote it in order to rise superior in his music to the misunderstanding around him, and to place to his own lips the cheering and refreshing cup of high-souled irony, finding in this, like all great minds, strength to go on undisturbed with his work. Bach's heart was lightened when in the aria of Phoebus and that of Tmolus he had represented his art as that of godlike charm. The pessimism that had weighed on him since the production of the St. Matthew Passion, and that finds such bitter expression in the letter to Erdmann, was now overcome. The cantata must have been performed again at the time of the Biedermann controversy. At that time, Bach did not conduct any of the students' singing societies, but the circle of friends who felt themselves wounded with him by the attack sought out the work again and found refreshment in it. This accounts for our possessing a manuscript copy of the textbook with the date 1749. The last two lines of the final recitative were altered to fit the case of the malicious pedagogue. In 1732 they had been sung thus, quote, Ergreife Phoebus nun die Leier wieder, es ist nicht lieblichers als deine Lieder. Take up thy lyre again, Phoebus, there is nothing more delightful than thy song. Unquote. They were now transformed thus, quote, Verdoppel, Phoebus, nun Musik und Lieder, tob auch Hortensius und ein Obil dawider. Redouble, Phoebus, thy music and singing, even though a Hortensius and an Orbilius rage against them. Unquote. Orbilius is the Horatian schoolmaster ready to strike. Hortensius, the Latin rhetor, is probably intended for Ernesti, the odious rector of St. Thomas's, who was particularly devoted to Latin oratory. End of chapter 30, part 1. Read by Sandra.